Welcome to Compact Murder from CompactHistories.com, where we take a look at real murder cases, assassinations and serial killers in short, bite-sized episodes. This is episode 92, The Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Texarkana has always possessed a divided identity. The state line between Texas and Arkansas runs directly through the community, creating two neighboring cities with separate governments and police forces. Roads led from its busy center into sparsely populated countryside, where wooded lanes, farms and quiet tracks offered privacy to young couples. In the spring of 1946, those isolated places became the setting for one of America's most disturbing, unsolved murder cases. The Second World War had ended only months earlier. Service members were returning home, families were rebuilding their lives, and Texarkana was benefiting from its position as a railway and manufacturing centre. With a combined population of roughly 40,000, it was large enough to have nightlife, cinemas and dance halls, but small enough for violent crime to feel personal. News travelled quickly, especially when victims came from familiar families or local schools. Between the 22nd of February and the 3rd of May 1946, 8 people were attacked in 4 separate incidents around Texarkana. 5 were killed and 3 survived. The attacks occurred late at night, generally at weekends, with intervals of approximately 3 or 4 weeks. 3 incidents took place beside secluded roads in Bowie County, Texas. The final shooting occurred at a farmhouse across the state line in Miller County, Arkansas. The crimes are now collectively called the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, although that name can be misleading. Not every attack occurred beneath a full moon, and investigators never proved beyond doubt that one person committed all 4. The first and last attacks differed significantly from the 2 double murders between them. Nevertheless, their timing, locations and selection of couples persuaded many officers that Texarkana was confronting a single predator. Newspapers called the unknown assailant the Phantom Killer or Phantom Slayer. The name suggested someone almost supernatural, able to emerge from darkness and disappear without leaving a clear identity behind. In reality, the killer was protected by secluded locations, limited forensic techniques, and a case divided among several jurisdictions. Later films and retellings added details that were never established by police. Only survivors of the first attack described a masked man. No witness saw the later killings take place, and no reliable portrait of the murderer ever emerged. Before Texarkana knew anything about a phantom, however, 2 people encountered an armed stranger on a lonely road. Both survived, carrying with them the only eyewitness descriptions associated with the case. Their ordeal was the first warning, although few initially recognized what it might represent. On Friday, the 22nd of February 1946, 25-year-old Jimmy Hollis and 19-year-old Mary Jean Larey went to a cinema in Texarkana. Later that evening, they parked on an isolated road outside the Texas side of the city. The location was commonly used by couples seeking privacy, yet it was only a short distance from the nearest homes. At approximately 11:45 p.m., a man approached the driver's side of Hollis's car and shone a flashlight through the window. His face was covered by a light-coloured cloth mask with openings cut into it. The light prevented Hollis from seeing much beyond the disguise, but the stranger was armed and ordered the couple out of the vehicle. Once Hollis was outside, the assailant struck him repeatedly across the head with the firearm. The blows were powerful enough to fracture his skull. Larry initially believed that Hollis had been shot because of the noise produced when the weapon struck him. She attempted to show the attacker that the couple had little money, apparently hoping robbery was his purpose, but he turned his attention towards her. The man ordered Larry to run along the road. When she did so, he pursued her, knocked her down, and sexually assaulted her with the weapon. She eventually escaped and ran to a nearby house, where she raised the alarm. Hollis regained consciousness and attracted the attention of a passing motorist. Despite his serious injuries, he also survived. Their descriptions gave investigators very little certainty. Both believed the attacker was approximately 6 feet tall, but they disagreed about his appearance beneath the mask. Hollis thought he was a white man with a dark complexion, probably under the age of 30. Larry believed he might have been a light-skinned black man. Darkness, fear, the flashlight and the covering over the assailant's face made confident identification almost impossible. Some officers doubted parts of their story and considered whether the couple might have known their attacker. No convincing evidence supported that suspicion, and nobody was charged. Because there had been no deaths and no obvious connection to another crime, the assault was investigated as an isolated incident. That interpretation appeared reasonable for a month. Hollis and Larry recovered, and the masked stranger seemed to have vanished. Then, on the morning of the 24th of March, a motorist noticed a parked car near another lover's lane outside Texarkana. Inside were Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. This time there would be no survivors to describe what had happened. Richard Griffin was 29 years old and Polly Ann Moore was 17. During the early hours of Sunday, the 24th of March, 1946, they drove to a secluded lane near US Highway 67, west of Texarkana. Later that morning, a passing motorist saw Griffin's car and discovered the couple inside. Both had been shot in the back of the head with a .32 caliber weapon. Evidence at the scene suggested Griffin and Moore had been killed outside the vehicle before their bodies were placed inside it. There were no eyewitnesses, and investigators could not determine exactly how the gunman had approached or controlled them, nor could they establish whether the attacker had worn the cloth mask described by Hollis and Larry. The similarities were nevertheless troubling. Two couples had been attacked late at night on quiet roads, almost exactly 1 month apart. Police questioned hundreds of people, examined reports of suspicious vehicles, and offered a reward for useful information. With no confession that matched the evidence, and no weapon recovered, the inquiry stalled. 3 weeks later, violence returned. On the night of Saturday, the 13th of April, 15-year-old Betty Jo Booker played alto saxophone with a band at a dance. Her friend, 16-year-old Paul Martin, collected her after the performance. When neither teenager returned home, their families began searching. Martin's body was found early on Sunday morning beside a road near Spring Lake Park. He had been shot several times. His car was located elsewhere, and the search continued for Booker. Several hours later, her body was discovered almost 2 miles away. She too had been shot, and her saxophone was missing. It was eventually recovered months later. Ballistics examinations indicated that a .32 caliber firearm had been used in both the Griffin Moore and Martin Booker murders. Investigators believed the same weapon had probably been responsible for the 2 double killings. 4 people had now died on isolated roads within 3 weeks of one another. The deaths of Booker and Martin struck Texarkana particularly hard. Both were local teenagers, and Booker was well known through her school and musical activities. Hundreds attended the funerals. Parents warned their children against travelling at night, while police increased patrols around parks and lovers' lanes. Newspaper coverage gave the unknown killer an identity. He was the Phantom, a name that captured both his secrecy and the fear spreading through the city. Although the connection to the February assault remained unproven, the survivor's account of a masked attacker supplied the public with an image. Residents could avoid lonely roads, but that protection depended upon the killer remaining outside the city's homes. On the 3rd of May, an attack at an isolated farmhouse destroyed that assumption and transformed anxiety into widespread panic. Virgil Starks lived with his wife Katie on a farm outside Texarkana on the Arkansas side of the state line. On the evening of Friday, the 3rd of May 1946, Virgil sat in an armchair reading a newspaper. At approximately 9 p.m, someone standing outside fired through a closed window. 2 bullets struck Virgil in the back of the head, killing him. Katie heard the breaking glass and entered the room. Seeing her husband collapse, she went to the telephone and attempted to call for help. The gunman fired through the same window again, striking her twice in the face. Despite her wounds and impaired vision, Katie moved through the house looking for a pistol. She then heard movement near the back of the property. Realizing the attacker might be entering the house, she escaped through the front door and ran barefoot towards a neighbouring home. Finding nobody there, she continued to another house, where she was finally able to summon assistance. Katie survived after receiving emergency treatment, but she was unable to identify the person who had fired through the window. The Stark shooting differed from the previous murders. It occurred earlier in the evening, at a private home rather than beside a parked car, and the weapon was a .22 caliber firearm rather than the .32 linked to the two double murders. No witness reported seeing a mask. Tire marks and the broad pattern of attacking couples encouraged investigators to consider a connection, but some officers later questioned whether Virgil and Katie Starks had encountered the same killer. For frightened residents, those distinctions offered little comfort. The phantom no longer appeared confined to lovers' lanes. If the same person had fired into the Starks' home, locked doors and respectable habits were no guarantee of safety. Texarkana changed after dark. Families remained indoors, businesses closed early, and residents bought guns, ammunition, locks, and window coverings. Police received reports of prowlers, suspicious cars, and imagined gunshots. Rumours claimed that the killer had been arrested, secretly removed from the city, or identified as almost any unpopular local figure. Armed citizens created another danger. Officers approaching homes or parked cars risked being mistaken for the phantom, while self-appointed patrols searched the roads. Police warned inexperienced residents against trying to capture the killer themselves. The Starks attack was the last crime officially associated with the series, yet nobody could know that at the time. As another expected weekend approached, law enforcement officers prepared for a fresh attack, while Texarkana waited behind locked doors. The phantom's absence offered no immediate reassurance. It simply left police hunting someone who had once again disappeared. The investigation involved an unusually complicated collection of agencies. Crimes had occurred in Bowie County, Texas, and Miller County, Arkansas, while Texarkana itself was divided between the two states. City officers, county sheriffs, Arkansas authorities, the Texas Rangers, and federal investigators all became involved. Information had to cross jurisdictional boundaries at a time when communication was far slower than it is today. Bowie County Sheriff Bill Presley had investigated the first attacks on the Texas side. Miller County Sheriff W.E. Davis took charge at the Starks farmhouse. Among the most visible investigators was Texas Ranger Manuel T. Gonzalez, widely known as Lone Wolf. His confident manner and distinctive appearance attracted national reporters, although the attention surrounding him sometimes threatened to overshadow the quieter work of local officers. Investigators compared bullets, examined tire impressions, interviewed residents, and followed reports of stolen vehicles. Patrols watched lovers' lanes, while officers sometimes posed as couples in parked cars in the hope that the attacker would return. Rewards grew as businesses and private citizens contributed money. None of those measures produced the decisive encounter police wanted. The physical evidence was frustratingly limited. Ballistics linked the two double murders through their .32 caliber ammunition, but no firearm was found. The February survivors had been attacked with a gun used as a blunt weapon, leaving no bullet to compare. The Starks shooting involved a different caliber. As a result, even the basic premise of the investigation, that one phantom committed every attack, could not be conclusively demonstrated. Hundreds of suspects were examined. Some were reported because of grudges, unusual behaviour, or vague similarities to the survivors' descriptions. Several people falsely confessed, forcing investigators to compare their statements with details withheld from the newspapers. One officer later recalled that none of the early confessions fitted the known facts. Rumour became almost as difficult to control as the search itself. Newspapers and police stations were overwhelmed by calls claiming that the phantom had been captured. Gonzalez publicly warned that unverified stories were diverting officers and placing innocent people under suspicion. Weeks passed without another recognised attack. Gradually, businesses resumed normal hours and residents ventured outside after dark. Fear declined through the summer, but the investigation remained active. A different line of inquiry was developing behind the scenes. Arkansas police officer Max Tackett noticed that stolen cars appeared to coincide with the nights of the murders. Following that pattern, led officers to a habitual criminal named Ul Swinney and to the woman travelling with him. At last, investigators had a suspect who seemed more substantial than a rumour. Ul Swinney was a 29-year-old repeat offender with a record that included car theft, burglary and counterfeiting. In July 1946, Max Tackett arranged surveillance around a stolen vehicle. A woman associated with Swinney arrived to collect it and was taken into custody. During questioning, she implicated Swinney in the Texarkana murders. The woman, usually identified as Peggy Swinney, reportedly supplied information that investigators believed had not appeared in newspapers. Her accounts, however, changed during repeated interviews. She withdrew accusations, altered important details, and proved unwilling to testify against Swinney. Her relationship with him also created legal obstacles because a wife could not readily be compelled to give evidence against her husband under the rules then in force. Police attempted to support her statements with independent evidence. They examined stolen car movements, Swinney's whereabouts and possessions connected with the couple. Investigators found circumstances they regarded as suspicious, but they did not recover a murder weapon, obtain a reliable eyewitness identification, or uncover physical evidence capable of placing Swinney at every scene. No murder charge was brought against him. In 1947, Swinney was instead sentenced to life imprisonment as a habitual offender following another car theft conviction. He was released in 1973 after successfully challenging that sentence. Some of the officers closest to the original investigation remained convinced that he had been the phantom, while later writer James Presley also argued strongly for his guilt. Their conclusion has never been tested in a murder trial. Other names entered the case. In 1948, university student Henry Booker Tennyson died by suicide and left a confession referring to several of the killings. Investigators found no supporting evidence, and a friend supplied him with an alibi for the Starks attack. Other confessors contradicted established facts or could be placed far from Texarkana. None provided a credible solution. The murders entered popular culture through Charles B. Pierce's 1976 film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Although inspired by the case, the film changed names, events, and methods. Its most infamous killing, involving a weapon attached to a trombone, was entirely fictional. For many viewers, however, the film's hooded figure became inseparable from the real crimes. Behind that image were 8 victims: Jimmy Hollis, Mary Jean Larey, Richard Griffin, Polly Ann Moore, Paul Martin, Betty Jo Booker, Virgil Starks, and Katie Starks. 3 survived, and 5 lost their lives during 10 weeks of violence. The attacks ended as suddenly as they had begun. No confession was proved, no weapon tied the entire series together, and no suspect was convicted. Whether the phantom died, went to prison for another offence, or simply stopped killing remains unknown. Texarkana was left with a name, a collection of incomplete clues, and an identity hidden by the darkness of 1946. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact Murder, part of the Compact Histories Network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compactmurder.com. where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, history, disasters, warfare, and mysteries. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/murdercoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.